I'd like to welcome everyone to this very special meeting of the Natural Resources Committee for the League of Women Voters of Florida. And in particular, I would like to thank all of you who are in attendance. We have many notable folks here from as far away as Palm Beach County and quite possibly Southwest Florida. So welcome to this very special edition. First off, I would like to talk about why we're here, who we are, and what this is about. Over a year ago, the League of Women Voters of Florida entered into a very special arrangement with the Berry Law School in the formation of the Environmental and Earth Law Clinic. And the League of Women Voters is the client for the clinic. So that when we initially got together, we said, well, let's work on a few things that are important to Florida. And since we've gotten together, the clinic has worked on trying to stop the sale of surplus conservation lands, which we were very successful at. There are several other projects that they've worked on for us. And so when, at the beginning of this year, it was evident that there was a problem in the state of Florida. There was a problem that had not been addressed yet. In December of last year, the Dan Hughes Company sent a memo to the Department of Environmental Protection asking for permission to begin an acid stimulation of a well that they had down in Collier County. The Department of Environmental Protection, in turn, looked through all their regulations, all the existing laws on oil and gas drilling, and they were, for the most part, stymied. So, in the face of no opposition from DEP, the Dan Hughes Company proceeded with their acid stimulation, which we know at this point now is considered fracking. Because of that, and because in April it was revealed that this had been going on, I asked Professor Rachel Deming if we could begin to work on setting up regulations to govern fracking in the state of Florida. This procedure, what happened from then on, we came to an agreement of a methodology, and the methodology was to look at all the existing laws throughout the entire country regarding fracking, all the existing regulations. And instead of reinventing the wheel and trying to come up with something from scratch, we said, let's pull from the laws that have already been passed, that have already been enacted across the country. Let's pull the ones that are relevant to the state of Florida, and let's put those together and fill in the gaps and come up with a good proposal for legislation. So what you're going to hear tonight is the product of the League's directive on formulation of regulations for fracking in the state of Florida. This is not anyone's particular choice of should we regulate fracking, should we ban fracking, should we leave fracking alone. This is the result of a directive from the League. Let's write legislation for regulating fracking. So it may be in your minds as you hear this presentation, this is something that we need to stop, this is something that should be banned. This is not what this is about. This is not what this particular session is about. This session is about regulation and putting regulations in place. And so the students, you'll hear from 8 students today who are the Earth and Environmental Law Clinic students under the direction of Professor Rachel Deming. And the students, one at a time, will take you through this legislation.
Good evening. My name is Jesus Martinez. I'm a student at Berry University School of Law, and I'm a participant of the Environmental and Earth Law Clinic. Along with me, there are my colleagues that I will be briefly introduced. Jacob Wagner, James Hogan, James Wooden, Pamela Lipetri, Adriana Olivares, Alina Pertu, Denise Cartolano, and our professor and mentor, Professor Rachel Deming. While we are here, one of our purpose in our clinic is to contribute to make our country more sufficient and to work towards a better quality of life, especially to our Floridians. As part of our duties, we consult with different organizations to work together in crucial issues to protect the health and the environment of our constituents. This semester, we had the privilege of working with the League of Women Voters of Florida, pursuing to address a new practice that could become a threat if we are not regulated properly. This practice is known as hydraulic fracking. Why discuss hydraulic fracking? Fracking is a process to extract natural gas for energy production. The process includes high-pressure injection of chemicals, sand, water, deep below the surface. And that is something that is coming to Florida. Basically, we have put together a comprehensive legislation, what we call Florida Hydraulic Fracturing Regulatory Act. Why we need this law? We have main issues that we're going to address tonight because we have a high amount of unknowns about what's going on with practice, with fracking, about the drilling process, about legislation right now in Florida. In addition, we have a lack of oversight. A recent report from Pennsylvania, they found that between 2009 and 2012, there were a lot of fracturing action in the state of Pennsylvania, and the state was unprepared. They were unable to monitoring the drilling activity, track the disposal of drilling waste, and to respond citizens' complaints of water supplies, meaning that that is a big issue of the lack of oversight of this practice. And also, we have a lot of headlines throughout the United States about well found contaminated near fracking, 4 states confirming water pollution from drilling, fracking accidents killing people in Colorado. In addition, we have in Wyoming, the Supreme Court is dealing with chemical disclosure. In addition, there's a in Oklahoma, Arkansas, there's news that there's a correlation between earthquakes and fracking practices, meaning that there is a big issue with fracking, and we want to get your attention on this matter. Tonight, this is a roadmap that what we're going to talking about. We're going to talk about permitting requirements, financial assurance. We're going to deal with baseline water testing, emission testing, liability penalties, and community consideration. We have worked together during this semester to put together a legislation, but we have taken in consideration all the states that are having fracking legislated through the United States. In addition, we have used proposed legislation in Florida in particular proposed legislation from the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. And we are here to present to you this legislation. Now I will let my colleague Jacob Wagner to continue.
As Jesus mentioned, my name is Jacob Wagner. I will be discussing the permanent portion of the presentation. Currently, the oil and gas regulation in Florida requires a $2,000 per permit application. It is currently undefined as to what that money is to be used for, and there's no statutory requirement for insurance. We are proposing an increase per payment application to $10,000, and this fee will be deposited into the hydraulic fracturing fund, which we've created through the Act. And it would be for the Department of Environmental Protection to use to administer and to enforce the Act. An additional issue covered by permitting is financial assurance. We've covered 4 different principles under financial assurance. It was our goal in creating the Act to meet 4 principles in regards to financial assurance. The first principle is to make polluters pay for all costs that they impose on the public, to require enough financial assurance to cover worst case potential costs, and to use forms of financial assurance that truly protect the public. And last but not least, to create no loopholes and no exceptions. One form of financial assurance that protects the public is the requirement of a bond. A bond attaches financial consequences and causation to an environmental harm. And before commencing an activity, permit holders must post a bond equal to the current or best estimate largest potential future environmental harm. This is in turn upfront security, and it was refundable upon plugging and reclamation of the site. Here's a graph that everyone's way, a graph that shows the current states that require a bond and the amounts that they require. As you can see, New York is the highest required bond currently, and it sits at $250,000 per permit, which just meets the minimum recommended level for plugging and reclamation of the site. As you can see, it ranges from $5,000 to $250,000 here in the U.S. Currently here in Florida, the oil and gas permitting processes are found in Florida statutes 62C, or Florida statutes 337, and rules 62C-26 and 62C-30 of the Florida Administrative Code. The current required bonds for Class 2 wells from 0 to 9,000 feet is $100,000, and from 9,001 feet and more, it's $200,000. And there is a blanket bond in the amount of $100,000 that can cover up to 10 wells. And the Florida Department of Environmental Protection reserves the right to require a larger or separate bond in addition to the single well or blanket bond surety for a particular well or wells. Our proposed legislation, we have increased the per permit bonding requirement to, from $200,000 to $500,000. This would require enough financial assurance to cover the worst case scenarios. We've also changed the language of subsection 4 to require a larger or separate bond, or excuse me, the department should require or shall require a larger or separate bond, whereas a standard condition and amount would not be sufficient to cover potential liability for damages, persons, or property. We've also taken out the blanket bond requirement, taking away any sort of discount for the operators if they would like to drill more than 10 wells. And we also took away the depth requirement due to the geology here in Florida. Operators won't be attempting to drill less than 9,000 feet, so it wasn't needed. James Hogan will now be presenting the disclosure process.
Good evening, everybody. I am one half of Team Disclosure, along with Jane Wooten. Disclosure generally is the public's right to know. And so what we did was we looked at how all other states in the United States that do have disclosure laws handle it. And that's how we approached it. First issue we noticed was that the scope of disclosure in the states is too narrow. In other words, it starts only after fracking has already begun, or in some cases, immediately after fracking is ended. So in other words, there's no advance notice really, and post-fracking, there's really not much in the way of chemical disclosures either. So that's not good. As you say, we shoot mass quantities of a chemical mixture into the ground. What could go wrong? Well, a lot of things, obviously. Things to consider, as I said, we look at other states, and California is very good in that it requires 30 days notice to nearby landowners and also 30 days notice of types and concentrations of chemicals. So what we did was we thought we would borrow that and incorporate it into our act, which we have done. And also Colorado is great in post-fracking, 60 days. So that's very good. So we're taking piecemeal here and there, the best that we can find, and incorporating it into our act. The problem with chemical disclosures in many states that do have disclosure laws, most of those states use what's called frackfocus.org. That is a website where the fracking companies voluntarily report the chemicals they use to that website. It's put up on the website, and that, in theory, would fulfill their disclosure requirements, their public disclosure requirements. But FracFocus has several deficiencies. Chemicals aren't identified clearly, no explanation of hazards, and there's no searchable database. Beyond that, because so many states use this website, it is, and as we have said, so many states have different piecemeal laws, not all the same. That it tries to be one size fits all, and it doesn't work really for anybody, in my opinion. Finally, trade secret exemptions are so wide you could drive a truck or two through them. The justifications for almost every state are very low. There are most of them, except for two, there are no factual justifications required at all. So what we thought we would do is try to increase that, and so we think we've done that. Now I will hand it to my partner, and Jane will take over the waste portion of the presentation.
Good evening. My name is Jane Wooten, and I wanted to talk with you tonight about waste disclosures. And in order to understand waste disclosures, we have to start with the beginning. So this is a simple roadmap that shows the steps from start to finish of hydraulic fracturing. We begin with one, which is water acquisition. The numbers vary, but typically it takes between 3 to 5 million gallons of water to fracture the wells, because they can be fractured up to 18 times per well. Mr. Hogan has already explained to you the different chemicals and how those are mixed with the water and injected into the well. So where I come in is after the hydraulic fracturing is completed, then the flow reverses because the pressure is released and the flow reverses. When it reverses, it flows back up, thus the name flowback. It's also referred to as wastewater. And the reason that is called wastewater is because not only do we have the chemicals that were injected into the water, but it also picks up radioactive materials such as uranium, radium, radon, thorium. It can pick up heavy metals and other toxic materials. Those all end up in the flowback or wastewater, and up to 70% of the flowback fluids returns to the surface. So the question is what to do with this water once it returns, and also leaks and spills, which is a concern. As you can see in this picture, we can have leaks and spills pretty much anywhere. It can be caused from faulty well casings. There is a 3% failure rate with the cement bond. It can come from the cracks that are designed to release the natural gas. Unfortunately, it can also release methane gas, and those methane gases can seep into the underground aquifers. So anywhere along the process, there's a potential for leaks and spills. So once we have all the water returned to the surface, it's what to do with it. So it can be stored in lined or unlined pits on site. It can be stored in injection wells underground. The problem with the injection wells, as was mentioned earlier, is the potential for seismic activity, not to mention that over time there could be leakage. Facilities, historically the waste treatment facilities handled wastewater, but it's not so much the case anymore because of environmental concerns. To be very blunt, these simply were not designed to handle radioactive materials. So, as you will see later, some states just refuse to accept it at some of their facilities. You can see on the picture that those are tanks that the drillers use on site to use for recycling, and they can inject the same water into the same well, which means they would be taking the water with the chemicals that is now toxic and adding more chemicals and re-injecting either into the same well or to additional wells or off-site, or taking it to facilities. And the problems on the surface are very obvious. You can see that the picture on the left shows the lined, simply a plastic liner, and it holds the contaminated wastewater. The picture on the right looks like a Olympic-sized swimming pool with a liner, and it contains the contaminated wastewater. And you can see the problem is how susceptible that would be to storm runoff or any leaks or spills. Not to mention from the pits to the hoses, from the hoses to the tanks, from the tanks to the trucks, and the trucks to the facilities. Anywhere along the way there could be spills and leaks. So we looked at other regulations in different states to see how they were handling their waste management. Some states simply placed a vehicle placard on the trucks hauling the toxic wastewater that said fracking wastewater, the little symbols on there. Other states, they refused to accept it at the facilities. They refused the wastewater if it contained high levels of radium, and they did test for it. And then other states simply prohibited wastewater. They didn't want anything to do with it. They didn't want to transport it. They didn't want to store it. They didn't want to do anything with it. And some states simply spread it around. So, similar to this picture where everything was spread out, so were the regulations. We wanted to find something that showed comprehensive disclosures, and all of the states pretty much lacked that. So then we looked for Florida's regulations, and Florida's Statute 377 simply states that they ensure that all precautions are taken to prevent the spillage of oil or any other pollutant, which is very good, but it's also very broad. There's simply no real comprehensive plan there. They also include a well completion report in Florida statute, but it's very limited. It asks for name, address, location. It simply didn't cover all the different aspects of waste that we felt like it needed to cover. We were looking for something extremely comprehensive. We wanted something comprehensive that would cover the who, the what, the where, the when, and the how of how this waste would be managed if they're going to bring it into the state of Florida. And the only thing that didn't cover is the why. So why do we need disclosures? Disclosures are important because disclosures provide us with transparency, and then transparency leads to better oversight and to better risk management.
Just to wrap up our portion, we wanted to tell you what the Act is going to do. There will be extensive provisions for well completion reports and annual reports, comprehensive disclosures regarding waste management. These are all in the Act. The new Act creates a website specific to Florida, Florida's Fracking Registry. It has a searchable database, extremely critical. That's, my research has shown, you have to have that to get anywhere. Problem with Frack Focus didn't have it. So we have permits that will be on there, identity of owner-operator, waste disposal information, chemical disclosure information, complaints or violations found under the Act will also be on there. As far as trade secrets, we need to set the bar much higher, and we do in this Act. More justification, we're putting the onus on the fracking company to show why those chemicals that they shoot into the ground are not going to be harmful to human health. We don't want any more rubber stamps, and that's happened all too often in other states. So additionally, we borrowed from the Conservancy, and we thank them for that. At the very end of the trade secret claims, there is an exception to an exception. So anything, and I doubt anything could slip through, but if it does, and it gets to this point, it will not be allowed to be claimed as a trade secret, so it must be publicly disclosed. My final comment would be, I have a question. When is public disclosure not public disclosure? And that is when it is done the way every other state has done it. If we do it this way, we think it will be a big step forward for public disclosure. Next up is Pam LePetri, and she's going to tell you about how Florida's geology applies to fracking in the fracking context. Thank you.
My name is Pamela LePetri, and I will discuss baseline testing and why it's in our proposed legislation. Before understanding why we need baseline testing, we first have to understand Florida's geology. Now, Florida's geology is unique because it's karst terrain, which is characterized by sinkholes, caves, and underground rivers. Florida is made up of sedimentary rocks, such as limestone, sandstone, shale, and clays. Limestone and dolostone, or dolomite, are the thick underlying rocks of Florida's geology. In addition, Florida has 3 types of aquifers: the superficial, intermediate, and Floridan. The Floridan aquifer covers an area about 100,000 square miles, and it covers all of Florida in addition to other states. Further, the Floridan aquifer is deep below sea level. And additionally, the Florida aquifer, or the Floridan aquifer, is the primary source of drinking water for a majority of Florida, so it needs to be protected. Surface water contamination is a major concern. For example, in Pennsylvania, one hydraulic fracturing operation contaminated drinking water of multiple wells, and we don't want that to happen here in Florida. Because of the structure of Florida's geology, cleanup is simply not an option. Often it's unclear as to the cause of groundwater contamination. It can also be difficult to determine when contamination occurred. So baseline testing could shed some light in this area of unknown darkness. Some benefits of baseline testing include avoiding and resolving disputes regarding the cause of water contamination. It highlights risk levels associated with oil and gas activity, including hydraulic fracturing. It leads to more informed public policy and regulatory decisions. And last, it leads to public confidence in oil and gas development and existing regulatory programs. So in our legislation, we included baseline testing, and here are some highlights as to it. This is because we included baseline testing because Florida's existing oil and gas statutes do not have guidelines to baseline testing. Further, Florida Administrative Code mentions monitoring groundwater after a spill is detected and reported after drilling has begun. Moreover, the code does not provide regulations for monitoring contamination before, during, or after drilling. It only mentions monitoring for leak detection. So therefore, there's a lack of oversight. In our legislation, we say that baseline testing occurs 6 months prior to conducting hydraulic fracturing operations. Further, the Department of Environmental Protection in Florida is the one that retains the independent third party, not the operator. Testing is within 5,500 feet of the well site. This is because horizontal drilling can extend to over a mile from the well site. Lastly, samples taken are from each aquifer level. The testing will be done once a month, and the results are submitted to the department within 7 days. The tests will also be posted on the department's website so that the public will know these results. In our legislation, we also said the installation of nested wells and multi-level installation system wells. Here's a comparison of what these 2 types of wells are. The nested well is 2 or more wells that are installed at different vertical depths, and a multi-level system well means a monitoring device consisting of packers placed at different vertical depths along a single casing string to monitor subsurface groundwater. We want these sampling techniques for operators because they benefit not only baseline testing and the groundwater itself, but they're also economical to the operator. Next, my partner, Adriana Oliveras, will discuss water monitoring.
Good evening. Because water contamination is a huge issue here in Florida, monitoring throughout the operation is required. The operator shall test the water every 6 months during the drilling and every 6 months after drilling. Continuous monitoring of the drilling operation provides oversight, and it leads to confidence in safer drilling activities. Test result recordation on the department's website leads to open communication with the public and no secret data. Currently, Florida does not regulate methane or greenhouse gases. Pound for pound, methane's impact on climate change is over 20 times greater than carbon dioxide on a 100-year period. Moreover, in the first 2 decades of its release, methane is 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide. EPA requires reporting methane, but does not require emission controls. According to EPA, most of methane emissions come from natural gas and petroleum industry. As you can see, currently it's at 29%. Operators shall be required to monitor methane as well as other greenhouse gases emissions. Modeling, our act will be modeled after Colorado's regulation, which was the first state to regulate methane. Our operators shall use valves that do not allow methane to leak. Monitoring of methane emission will be required once per month. And once a leak is found, it shall be repaired within 5 days of detection. Operators shall report the leaks to the department, and state inspector shall examine the repair 15 days after. Monitoring requirements will be equally applied to all drilling operations. Alina Pertu will speak to you about liability. Thank you.
Good evening. Liability is a legal responsibility to another or society enforceable by civil remedy or criminal punishment. As you have already heard, there are several issues surrounding hydraulic fracturing. Pipeline and well leaks, pollution, surface spills, and water supply are all examples of liability concerns from fracking operations, all of which our Act addresses. However, the main issues are found at the surface. Spills and well blowouts release fracking chemicals and flow back to groundwater and surface water. The potential for longer-term groundwater contamination from fracking is particularly concerning, as it raises a possibility that contamination will become apparent only long after the drillers responsible have left the scene. For example, spills, blowouts, and other accidents related to fracking have caused numerous fish kills in Pennsylvania. In 2009, a pipe containing fresh water and flowback water ruptured in Washington County, triggering a fish kill in a tributary of Brush Run, which is part of a high-quality watershed. That same year, in the same county, another pipe rupture at a well drilled in a public park killed fish and other aquatic life along a 3/4 mile of a local stream. Fracking can undercut the long-term economic prospects of areas where it takes place. Damage to aquatic ecosystems has a direct negative impact on the economy. The loss of recreational or commercial fisheries, excessive withdrawals of water, or changes in water quality caused by the cumulative effects of fracking in an area can have devastating impacts on local businesses. Many of the costs of fracking are often borne not on those that benefit, but by nearby residents, taxpayers, and those whose enjoyment of clean air, clean water, and abundance of wildlife are impacted by fracking, and even by future generations. So what's at stake when we put it into numbers? Florida hosts the largest wildlife tourism segment in the Gulf, receiving $8 billion in revenue and rising each year. Wildlife tourism relies on the natural beauty of Florida, which in turn relies on thriving ecosystems. Florida's coastal counties host over 16,000 wildlife tourism-related businesses, and over 7.6 million wildlife tourists visit Florida every year. Prevention is the best defense to the unknown, hence why the burden needs to be placed on the back of industry and not the public. Current laws are inadequate to ensure that even the basic standard of protections are met. As of now, Florida initially places the burden of all costs of cleanup on the state, then requiring the state to bring suit. We are proposing to shift that burden and place it on the operator at the outset of any pollution, contamination, or diminution. The current penalty provision provides little incentive for operators to avoid violations. Also, the current fine amount is inadequate to cover the harm being done. Our act proposes to increase penalties for a few reasons: to incentivize proper oversight, to hold operators accountable, and to minimize potential expenses incurred by the state, all by means of attaching civil and criminal liability. Failing to hold industry accountable not only leaves the public exposed to many types of costs, but it also creates a disincentive for industry to take action to prevent accidents and environmental contamination. The mounting evidence of fracking's impact on our environment, health, and communities is enough to spur reconsideration of when, where, and under what circumstances is permitted to take place. And now, Denise Cardilano will discuss community considerations.
Good evening. My name is Denise Cardilano, and I'm going to speak about community considerations, which I feel like most of you would be really interested in because you are the community. When we initially started drafting this legislation, we knew we wanted to involve the community, especially in the decision-making process when it comes down to the hydraulic fracturing permits. The members of the community are the one that's going to be directly affected by these operations, and therefore you should have a voice in the process. What we learned from other states is that fracking not only brings a high risk of pollution, soil and water contamination, but it also increases noise pollution and traffic. For example, in Texas, the fracking boom has boosted fatal accidents for oil and gas workers and as well as for local residents. Triple tragedies, which are accidents that kill 3 or more people, have become common in Texas. The death toll from these type of catastrophic events increased statewide from 72 in 2010 to 101 in 2012 and 148 last year. These are directly in correlation with an increase in hydraulic fracturing operations. In order to allow those affected to have a say in fracking operations, we have incorporated an approval process by the local community during this permitting phase. So whenever an application is made to conduct a hydraulic fracturing operation that the department receives, there also needs to be something that the department receives, and this will be approval by the local county, village, incorporated town, or city. They need to approve these operations. Within 5 calendar days of the department's receipt of the hydraulic fracturing application, the department will post a notice of receipt on their website. So you'll be able to go to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's website and you'll be able to see that a permit for hydraulic fracturing was requested. This will provide the necessary information as well for a public comment period for interested parties to submit comments. We believe this will allow the necessary transparency and ease of access to those local community members who stand the most to be affected. So where have we seen public comment periods before? We've seen it in the federal government. Whenever a federal agency wants to impose a new regulation, they have to post it on their website and allow a specific amount of time for comments. These comments have historically been successful in allowing the person placing the regulation to get insight into what the community believes is important and to get a collection of ideas. Everybody has ideas that other people don't. So this is a way to bring everybody together and to see what can be done to make this the safest and to make everybody the most comfortable with this process. In the system we propose for the public comment period, it'll begin 7 days after a permit is received by the department and it'll last for 30 days. So any person, government agency, or county feeling like they have some stake in the matter or that they've been adversely affected under a proposed permit, they can file written objections to the application. They also may request a public hearing during the public comment period. Furthermore, we also put some other safeguards in place, basically some different options. This act will also allow local governments to enact stricter regulations. So if they think that there needs to be a higher bond or whatever the local government feels is necessary, they can make those regulations in their towns, make those ordinances, and those can be for those communities. They can also decide to ban the operations entirely, so we leave it up to the communities to do that. In closing, I just want to leave you with this thought. We weren't here today trying to completely abolish hydraulic fracturing. We do realize that some people believe it's necessary for our state and for our country to be independent. We're only regulating it to make it safer. You can compare hydraulic fracturing, for example, to driving a car. Driving a car is considered a dangerous activity, but as many Americans don't get in their car in the morning and think, wow, this is extremely dangerous. I'm back out of my driveway and something terrible is going to happen. They're putting on the radio, they're thinking about their day at work, drinking their coffee. They're almost not even engaged. But it still is a dangerous activity. But why are cars still on the road? Because they're regulated, they're made safer. They have windshield wipers, rear view mirrors, and we even have safety inspections in place. So now we're driving cars in a safer way. The same can be said with this fracking legislation. We're putting the windshield wipers and the rear view mirrors on fracking. I want to thank you all for coming today.
Well, I just wanted to say that this truly was the product of these students. It was not my product. I was there trying to provide support and some guidance, but this was really their complete creation. And I think that they've done just a marvelous job, and what's even been more has been working with Chuck has been an amazing experience for the students to start the development of their legal practice, to have such a great client to work with and someone who is so willing to give his time and to interact with the students to help them develop their skills. So we need to applaud Chuck and thank him. And then I just want to note two other people here in the audience who are our two advanced students. Carolina Kropinski and Margaret Stewart were students in the clinic last semester and went up to Tallahassee and made presentations to the League's annual legislative summit. And they were so engaged that they came back to help again. So we've got a legacy going here now. So.